Good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. Back from UMKC and a wonderful, wonderful conference. Back from being able to hang around the safe people who get it, right? People who get it. My goodness, if we could just take that little cocoon of people that get it and make that be one big giant explosion across the world and change the minds of everyone everywhere. My goodness, what a world we would live in. What a phenomenal world we would live in. But I want to talk about how not all opinions matter, okay? And I'm going to make a strong case for this, and I hope you'll hear me through. So, when you see someone beating the shit out of somebody, you see someone literally beating the shit out of somebody, and you say, "Hey, what are you doing beating the shit out of somebody?" And the guy goes, "Hey, it's my business. Why do I always have a gang of people that don't want me to beat the shit out of somebody come over and yell at me for beating the shit out of somebody? It's not fair. Don't I have a right to an opinion? What if it leads me to beat the shit out of somebody? Don't I have the right to do it?" And I think to myself, that might seem like an extreme logical craziness that would never happen. But, you know, my world, it goes back to economics, right? So if you know for a fact that cutting federal spending equates to the death and lack of quality of life for millions of people, if you know that, let's talk for a minute about what the difference is between someone physically curb stomping someone versus cutting spending that literally makes their family starve, keeps them in the cold, homeless, without health care, and then they die. Tell me what the difference is with physically curb stomping someone and cutting spending that equates to death equally. I'll wait. I got time. Both equal death. One leaves you with a little bit of a slack jaw, but the other one is equally lethal. I'm asking a legitimate question. I want to understand why an ass beating in the hallway, why an ass beating at a bar, why an ass beating in the parking lot somewhere is somehow or another more important to take someone to jail for than someone advocating cutting federal spending that kills millions of people, at least hundreds and thousands of people, but it destroys millions of people's lives. I'm asking you a genuine question. If you know the result of cutting spending equals the death or the loss of quality of life for many, many millions of people, if you know this, why is that any different than literally curb stomping someone to death? What is the difference? I want to understand what the difference is and why people feel it's, you know, if you saw someone beating the shit out of someone, if you saw someone literally taking a baseball bat and clubbing someone like a seal, if you saw someone getting beat the hell out of in a parking lot and literally killed, or someone putting a gun to their head and shooting them, you would run and scream, go, "No!" Call the cops, you do whatever. But when someone says, "Let's go ahead and cut spending," it does the same thing. What is the difference? Now, I know there's legal differences, and I know that there is visual differences, and I understand that people literally think that if I don't see the death, then maybe it's not because of that. But what happens to the person that can't afford medical care, but we could afford it? Our nation could easily afford it, but they die without health care. And it was something you voted against because you thought it was your hard-earned tax dollars paying for it. But in reality, it wasn't. And then they die. There's a proxy in there. We're going to call that a murder by proxy. And for those of you who are sensitive, we'll call it manslaughter by proxy or reckless endangerment by proxy or whatever the hell your sensitivities allow for. But the bottom line is 1 equals death and 2 equals death. And it is my job as an economic activist for you to understand the difference is nit. It's not at all. You are literally killing someone, but one of them is legal and one of them is very illegal. And by the way, I don't advocate for any of this. I don't advocate for any violence whatsoever, ever, for any reason. But I'm telling you straight up, the net effect is someone literally died. Death by policy. Death by government policy. Death by voting for someone who thought that the federal debt was something to worry about. We got to cut spending because we got to reduce the deficit. It's scary. I don't understand it. We got to reduce it. But then there's people that die. And now all of a sudden, you want me to respect your opinion and not send a band of activists out there to educate you. You want us to be okay with those deaths because to you, you don't understand, so you wouldn't like us to not send a bunch of people to educate you. You want to get away with it. You want that murder to be okay. You want to be okay with that. You want your opinion to matter. You'd like your opinion to matter. Now, I want to talk about this. This is going to get a little wonky, but I'm going to try and do it in as human a fashion as possible. As human a fashion as possible, part of the regular people, not using a bunch of big words. I'm going to do my best to boil this down into very, very consumable bites. When you look back at the Weimar Republic, Germany, and you realize that they had a very, very harsh hyperinflation. Their currency was worthless. They couldn't buy anything with it. It goes on till 2017, people still talking about Weimar Republic. Weimar Republic was a very, very different situation, but let's talk about it for a minute. Weimar Republic was brought to ruin by the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles denominated Germany's debt, not in German francs or Reichsmarks, but in French francs. In other words, they made Germany like Greece today. They made them pay a debt that was not their sovereign currency. They were not allowed to pay their debt in German Reichsmarks. They were forced to pay it in French francs. So their productivity shut down. Everything shut down. They had no means of production. Okay? Has nothing to do with printing money. It has to do with the fact that their entire productive capacity had been brought to its knees with harsh Treaty of Versailles regulations. Debt denominated in a foreign currency. Now, let's flash forward to the United States debt. The United States sells treasury bonds to defend a positive interest rate. So in order to buy a U.S. Treasury bond, you got to have money to buy it, right? You don't go in there and say, I'll take your U.S. debt off your hands for free. No, you go ahead and you buy with your own money a treasury bond. And you earn a very small interest like a savings account. So when we say, how are you going to pay that money back? You talk about like the 1% interest, 2% interest, whatever. Is that what you're worried about? Well, it's not debt denominated in a foreign currency, because when those countries and those corporations buy U.S. Treasury bonds, what do you think they're using to buy U.S. Treasury bonds with? Do you think they're using chicken necks? How about a bag full of diamonds? Do you think that they're bringing barrels of oil to buy treasuries with? They're using U.S. dollars. So when a country like China has a balance of trade, if you will, that is positive on their side, in other words, they've got U.S. dollars because they have been a net exporter to the U.S., they take those U.S. dollars that are already in existence and they say, well, what do we do with these U.S. dollars? We don't really have anything to buy with them right now. Why don't we go ahead and buy some treasuries with it so it doesn't just sit there parked at the Fed? Why don't we earn a little bit of interest on this money that we already have? Voila. So when we talk about paying down the debt, what do you mean? How are you going to pay down a savings account? That money is U.S. dollars. Those U.S. dollars, just go there and buy treasuries. You didn't do anything. It's nothing. So why would someone say something so worthless as worrying about the federal debt? Congress wrote laws that said we got to sell bonds when we spend. But those bonds don't actually pay for anything. They don't pay for anything. It takes money out of the economy as an inflationary measure. That's it. And then in 6 months or 2 years or however long their treasury bond, time box is, they can roll that money into another treasury, or they can use it to spend on something wherever U.S. dollars are allowed. Like, I don't know, anywhere, really. But it would be in the United States most likely, right? So what happens when someone spends money in the U.S.? Did somebody say economic activity, economic growth, economic viability, economic awesomeness? I think I heard that. Ah, okay, cool. So what we're talking about here is a big, giant nothing burger, right? There's nothing to be afraid of with the debt, right? I mean, seriously, there is nothing to be afraid of. They took existing U.S. dollars that they earned, they bought with their U.S. dollars treasury bonds to take money out of the economy so it would slow it down. And then they earned a small piece of interest. What's the big deal? What are you sweating? And where do you think the interest comes from? Your hard-earned tax dollars? Tula what? No, keystrokes. Keystrokes, nothing more than that. So when people talk about the debt, why do you think we should just let them get away with it without calling them to account? Debt fear porn is lethal to progress. Debt fear porn is lethal to progress. Now, let me ask you something. When I just described the whole U.S. debt right there in a nutshell, I didn't panic. I didn't bead sweats. I didn't cut myself. I didn't do anything cuckoo. It's a pretty simple story to tell, really. Nothing tricky about it. No fine math. No equations. Simple shit. Simple shit. So why would we conflate U.S. debt with our own budgets, our own household debt? Like when you and I take out a credit card and they come at us with 25% interest versus 1% interest over there. Can you and I keystroke dollars into existence? No, Steve, we can't. No, we can't. So why would we even compare the two? Right there. I don't have to even say another word. Steve, where do U.S. dollars come from? Oh my God, where do they come from? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. When Congress writes a bill, Congress then issues orders to the Federal Reserve. Maybe it's on a piece of paper, maybe it's a sticky note, maybe it's an electronic thing, whatever, right? Whatever. They send them instructions and say, yo, we're going to spend this money, it's now authorized. The Fed says, oh, okay, we got to make some keystroke deposits into the Treasury's account. Where did the keystrokes come from? Where did the dollars come from? Oh, shit. Came from fingers. Not from hard-earned tax dollars. Why in God's name would someone say... anyway, so all of a sudden, now U.S. dollars, keystrokes, deposits are made into the Treasury's accounts. Plural. Those accounts then in turn disperse payments. They write checks, and government checks don't bounce. Now, there's bank money. Ooh. Bank money, credit money. Dollars are temporary. Dollars have always been temporary. Do you understand that dollars don't live forever? Dollars are born into existence and then they die. Government dollars are spent one time. Once they come back as a tax, they die. There's a morgue somewhere. You can buy shredded bills all over the place. Okay? It's not my precious. Dollars are temporary. They come into existence. They go out of existence. We're not talking about some forever thing like gold. You know, we're chewing on gold nuggets, chewing on wooden nickels. No, they're temporary. So what happens? We go to the bank, we borrow money. The bank keystrokes deposits, which are really bank IOUs denominated in the government's their account, the actual dollar, the unit of account. But when you pay off your loan, the account zeroes out, the bank keeps the interest, but that money is no longer there. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. Banks don't lend deposits. Loanable funds theory is dead. Banks don't lend reserves. Who knew? MMT, that's who. Ask Randall Wray. So money comes from a couple places, right? You can have credit. You can have loans. You can have fresh-made U.S. dollars, net financial assets coming out of the federal government, spending on the public purpose, or the war machine. Now, you never hear anybody go, we're going to become Weimar Republic if we go ahead and bomb somewhere, right? You never hear that. Well, shit, if we bomb there, we're going to become the Weimar Republic. Steve, I'm telling you, man, if we print those dollars to create those bombs, we're going to become Weimar. Never, ever will you hear that. Is it because people are terrible people? I'm going to say probably some. But most are just illiterate about economics. They talk to a bunch of people at the fucking fire. They put their Birkenstocks on. They light their friggin', cinnamon cigarettes. And they talk about things that they don't understand. That's possible too, right? I'm sure you've been around people at the bar, 12 drinks in, telling you about the Federal Reserve. Maybe you've heard them sitting there, banging away on the keyboard frantically, and you get to them and they're like, oh man, he's bigger than I thought he was. I'm telling you right now, all opinions don't matter. And if you see someone getting the shit kicked out of them, you don't just walk away and go, oh, they're just exercising their opinion. Oh, everybody's got an opinion. Opinions are like assholes. Just let them keep whooping that man's ass. No. And you wouldn't do that if you understood economics either. Because economics is lethal if you do it the wrong way as well. And so since I do understand this, when I see someone say something economically illiterate, I look at it like they're taking a billy club to someone's skull and cracking them. I look at it like they're taking a child's food out of their mouth. I look at it like they're taking away someone's cancer medication. I look at it like they're breaking up families. I look at it like they helped somebody tie a hangman's noose and said, here, try that one on for size. I look at it like they went ahead and kicked the chair. Kick the chair! You know what I'm talking about? Boom, kick that chair out from under. That's what I see that as. Now, you may not see it that way because you don't understand economics or maybe you don't care. But it's pretty black and white to me. So when somebody tells me that suddenly I've got to allow them to have this economically illiterate mindset and have it go unchallenged because everybody's entitled to an opinion. Well, they don't understand the first thing about activism, number one. And number two, they definitely don't understand economics. So I want to talk a little bit about something called sectoral balances. I'm going to do it graphically without graphics. You got a bathtub. Inside the bathtub, you've got water. We're going to call that money. The bathtub's the economy. You got drains at the bottom of the bathtub. And you got spigots pouring into the bathtub. One of the spigots pouring into the bathtub is federal spending, aka federal debt and all the other shit. Although spending and debt are not one and the same at all, let's just say, for lack of a better term, we got federal spending. Then we've got private debt. And then we have trade, aka trade deficit, trade surplus, balance of trade, current accounts balance, whatever, right? So if we are a net importer, that means there's no water coming out of the spigot, but there is a net drain out based on trade. If we have a shit ton of private debt and we're unable to legitimately go into debt to support our needs because we are tapped out and now predatory lending is kicking in, that is no longer a viable option to keep the economy going. So two of the spigots are now shut off. That leaves one spigot and one spigot only, and that's federal spending. So when you cut federal spending, it pushes us over here to these other things. That's saying, hey, we're a net exporter. Hey, you don't have very much private debt, so we need to go ahead and rely on you to fill the bathtub up with these two things. But both of those things are tapped right now. We are a net importer to the tune of $500 billion a year, and we have huge private debt, beginning with the $1.3 trillion of student debt, student loans. So when the libertarians and the conservatives and the really, really disgusting progressives that take right-wing logic using Milton Friedman's school of thought, when they sit there and tell us we got to cut federal spending, now the bathtub is literally got no money going into it, no water going into it. The only thing that is happening is a drain. And then the water goes down, the level goes down, and we have a recession or a depression, and then we have more death. Death, 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 death. Pretty fucking simple shit. Pretty simple. Now, I go back to my initial question to you. If you see someone getting curb stomped, or you hear someone saying we got to worry about the federal debt and the federal deficits, and you hear them talking about reducing spending or eating our peas or lying and saying we got to take out a credit card to the People's Republic of China, or you hear them lying about taxes paying for spending, are they really any different than the guy that takes your teeth and puts them on the curb and then kicks you in the back of the head, ending your life? Are they really any different? I posit they are one and the same. I posit they are one and the same. Now, one may not understand what they're doing, so you might give them the benefit of the doubt for being ignorant. But is the result any different? Death and death. And the best one, passing the debt on to our grandchildren. Yes. Another heartfelt lie. Another lie that is told to keep the bathtub draining more and to keep putting pressure on you and I to go into private debt, which fixes whose wallet? Wall Street. That is the Wall Street game. That is the 1% game. That is neoliberalism. And when you hear people talking about debt deficits and fanning the fear porn, when you hear them say MMT is stupid, or you hear them call it a cult, you know that they have literally put someone's teeth on the curb and kicked them in the back of the goddamn neck. That's what I'm talking about, folks. I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives. Have a good night, everybody.